interest of figuring out what enables significant behavioral change to take place in relation to climate. But I want to be just a little more specific. Susie is first and foremost a geographer. She got the equivalent of a BA in geography from the University of Trier, followed by a diploma in 1994. Her thesis showed Moser tackling climate issues, poetically titled Wheels of Misfortune. The thesis studied a 34-year history of storms. Moser went on to do an MA and a PhD in geography at Clark University. And the dissertation in 1997 called Mapping the Territory of Uncertainty and Ignorance, Broadening Current Assessment and Policy Approaches. Now this interested me, that dissertation, as showing Susanne already thinking about issues of uncertainty and ignorance, now much developed into larger issues she addresses in more recent work to do with living in uncertain times, climate change denial, and so forth on those kinds of issues. But it seemed to me that the germs of those ideas were already there in the dissertation. Since earning her PhD, Moser has worked at academic institutions, a think tank, a science-oriented environmental advocacy group, a national lab, and more recently in the private sector as an independent researcher. As she puts it, with this broad perspective, Moser researches and provides assistance to local, state, federal government agencies and not-for-profit organizations in her three areas of expertise, which she lists as 1, development of adaptation strategies to climate change, 2, effective climate change communication and social change, and 3, science policy interaction. So it's a wonderful interlinked series of foci. So as I read that, it seems to me that Moser saw that just doing science climate change was not going to bring about the social changes needed for a sustainable world. Enabling this sustainable world requires the participation of most of the world's people. So Moser realized she needed to know more about what moves people to change, how this is related to societal change, such that people will agree to do what needs to be done. Working with Lisa Drilling, Moser obtained a grant to bring together experts across a huge range of disciplines so as to jumpstart new ways of thinking about the challenges that face humans and the planet. Dialogue across disciplinary divides, she recognizes are difficult but essential. New ways of thinking, new practices, new interdisciplinary understandings are to emerge. Papers of the participants resulted in an extraordinary anthology with 32 chapters, and I meant to get it out of the library. It is this thick, it really is. It's a wonderful volume with 32 chapters, and the book is titled Creating a Climate for Change, Communicating Climate Change and Facilitating Social Change. So I think it's a compendium. I mean, it was produced in 2006, and although a great deal has happened since then, the list of ideas, the new ways of thinking that appear in that book are still totally what we need to be thinking about as well. Since then, Moser has just very recently published a new book, also an anthology. Is this co-edited?
Yeah, with
Maxwell Boycott. And this one's called Successful Adaptation to Climate Change, Linking Science and Policy in a Rapidly Changing World. I haven't yet had a chance to look at this book, but I really just can't wait to actually see that. One of Moser's contributions to her first volume that I value greatly is her stress on the importance of attending to emotions in addressing climate change. She warns of the danger of unhampered and unattended emotions, and I like that phrase very much, of the need to bring emotions such as fear, guilt, anger into focus in case they paralyze, these unattended emotions paralyze or mislead us. We have to bring them out. Above all, she aims to replace appeals to fear with, in her words, fostering true hope. I just want to be anecdotal for 1 minute and mention that I first met Susie when she came to counsel, as it were, an executive committee of the Consortium of Humanities working on developing a climate change project, and to watch her work with us, sort of brainstorming with us as we try to develop concepts, I feel that I have a little glimmer of the kind of training leader she is, and the importance of that work. So having experienced Moser in action, as it were, I wanted to bring her to the Institute as part of our interdisciplinary project on humanities for the environment. So let's welcome Susie, who will talk on when climate change comes home. So thank you so much.
God, what a wonderful introduction. I just feel like, okay, can we just talk now? That was like all that we needed to hear. So thank you very, very much for inviting me and for all of you to come. It's really wonderful. I gave originally a title for this talk that started with "Getting Real" or something like that. I forget exactly what it says on your poster. And then since then, we've had more catastrophes. And, you know, just for those of you who don't know, I was invited to come here a year ago, but you were busy cleaning up after Sandy. So I didn't think it was a good time to come join you. So I thought, well, you know, this is sort of one pole, Sandy, and then Haiyan most recently, to sort of frame almost, what am I talking about? What am I trying to get to? How do we talk to people about climate change and keep them engaged if this is sort of the ongoing and continual future that we have? So that's really what it is, even though I did make a note to myself, do not ever plan another talk on the East Coast, you know, when you see one of those things coming up the coastline. Just kidding, we obviously said that. But you all remember this. This is what you experienced. You were probably here in the midst of it. Horrifying pictures that we all got to experience vicariously. And it's not just here, right? This is the floods of Boulder, the droughts of the Midwest, the fires of the far west, extreme heat. It just goes on like this. So we all have our share of catastrophes. And it's not just during the extreme days. I want to show you this picture here. I love this. It's a house in Florida, southern Florida. And on a absolutely beautiful, clear sky, at high tide, it looks like this. You might notice the for sale sign. It's not in other words, it's here, right? It's not, you know, and scientists may, as much as they try to distance themselves from, okay, this event is due to climate change, this one isn't, it doesn't matter. What we're, you know, beginning to sort of gather is we're connecting the dots between all of these things, and you actually can see that in surveys of the American public in terms of what they experience and whether or not they do tie that to climate change, and they increasingly do. And then, you know, I couldn't help myself because I was just riveted these last few days with the pictures from the Philippines. So it's not just here, it's everywhere, on every continent. And so the verdict, at least as far as the public is concerned, on a large segment of the public is in. This, again, a picture from post-Sandy. So this is hard stuff to take in and keep looking at. Right? And we all have our various reactions to that. How should we respond to that? How do we bring out maybe those things that are in red, if you will, as opposed to those things in black that just keep us kind of stuck in the heads in the sand? That's the challenge I see for communicators of the future, and maybe not so far future. This is, as we speak, you know, going on right now. So for me, this communication of climate change as it comes home is really the human story, and how do we connect to that human story? And I don't know, did any of you see this movie? Yes, I see nods and I see smiles. It's a fascinating movie if you haven't seen it. Beasts of the Southern Wild. I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. But I want to just make sure, you know, it says at the end of that movie, the events and all characters appearing in this work are fictitious. Any resemblance to real events and persons living or dead is purely coincidental, of course, right? That's what they have to say. Except to say that this is what Louisiana looks like right now. Southern Louisiana is sinking due to extraction of gas, oil, and groundwater, and the sea is rising. And so you see, this here is a bridge at Leeville, which, as you can see, goes into the water. It doesn't do anymore what it used to do. So we're seeing this. So the infrastructure right on the coast that connects us to, offshore, whatever production, fisheries, harbors and whatnot, and on land, is going away, right? And people are abandoning their land. So these are stories of deep loss, deep implications for livelihood. How do we deal with that? That's the question that I'm asking. And so, it is really a task, as I see it, as grappling with loss on the one hand, and somehow also still supporting people to adapt to that and make other changes that may, maybe prevent the worst of this by focusing again on why we should maybe change our energy and transportation habits. So let me, to begin this, situate the communication of adaptation between a few things. On the one hand, there is sort of the risk communication, the disaster communication of what do you need when the storm comes, right? In that moment, it's very situational, it's very concrete, it's focused on the next thing, get out of your houses, go to the shelter, here's what, after it happens, here's where you go get relief, whatever. That's that kind of communication. On the other hand, is something that maybe we can broadly describe as sustainability communication. It's sort of the broader engagement on how do we live with ourselves on this planet and how do we change our behaviors more fundamentally. It's longer term, it's sort of oriented toward that desirable state. Somewhere in between those two is where adaptation communication falls. And I would add to that, there's sort of the science communication side of climate change, to just make sure what is this all about. And on the other hand, mobilizing people to actually do something, right? So somewhere in this tension field, if you will, is where I would locate this particular challenge. And I want to tell you, this is a more recent paper that I'm just writing, and I mention it only here because it's actually, its title is a turn toward the human, or is there a humanistic turn in environmental communication? It addresses the issue of how to communicate when we are in perpetual crisis. And so you might find that interesting, whether or not in the time of gadgets and communication electronically and vicariously, do we maybe still need the heart-to-heart? Is sort of the overarching question. But this is sort of a development on a paper that I wrote first maybe 2 years ago. It's now published. It's called Getting Real About It, Meeting the Psychological and Social Demands of a World in Distress. And something really interesting happened in this paper, and this is partly the story I want to tell you here. This is in a handbook on environmental leadership, and I basically just wanted to say something about, what are the sort of skills one needs as an environmental leader in the future. It's oriented toward undergraduates and graduate students. And I just think, it's more than political savvy and advocacy skills and knowing the science of whatever piece of environment you want to work in. I really think that as a leader in this future that I just laid out, you need a whole set of other skills that are mostly social and psychological. And I paint a pretty dark picture in it, just to get people sort of, oriented to why do we need that, which I'll do for you here in a minute so you can judge it for yourself. And so it's a pretty bleak picture, and then I told people also what I think, they can do. But I was afraid that this was going to be the end of my scientific credibility or something. And I just had the most incredible reactions to this, which I'll share with you. That they've been just nothing but supportive from every corner of the planet. So let me do this number on you so you'll see for yourself whether it works for you. This is the trajectory on. You've probably seen this many times. This is a depiction of the emissions trends over the last few years. It starts in 1990, and the last measured ones now go up to last year. And from here on is when the IPCC also started to project forward the possible emissions future we have. So these are the cryptic names of these. These are the high-end projections, the low-end. You see it here. And so you see what we have actually done, how we've tracked, right? And we've basically tracked the worst-case scenario. And in fact, we're going well beyond it. We're north of it. right? So we're not doing pretty well as far as the projections are concerned. What this is currently putting us on is a projected increase of average temperature of about 8 or 9 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. So this is not good news. There was a very interesting graphic developed one time. You may just put this in context. You may know that the UN Framework Convention for Climate Change has an Article 2, which basically says we're trying to keep climate change below dangerous interference with the climate system. Now, what does dangerous mean? Right? The EU came up with what they call the 2-degree guardrail. In other words, if we go beyond 2 degrees, we're in danger, and below that, we're okay. So why would we be concerned? What would be the reasons for thinking it's dangerous? Well, there are 5 categories that people thought of. One had to do with risk to unique and threatened systems, say coral reefs or those kinds of things. Risk of extreme weather events. There's the second one, distribution of impact. In other words, are they covering the planet, or are they focused in one place and we can deal with it, whatever. Aggregate impacts, mostly an economic measure, and the risk of large-scale discontinuities, shutdown of the thermohaline circulation, or the Arctic, loss of the Arctic ice with all the feedback effects and so on and so forth. That's the kind of things, right? And so what you see here is, when it gets red, it's dangerous. But with the 2-degree guardrail, we sort of are in an area. This was done first in 2001. With the 2-degree guardrail, we thought, we're not in too bad a shape. And then this was updated, mostly because we just looked around and saw more of what's happening. Just more recently, this was published in 2009, and you see how every one of them has come down into the red has come sort of closer. And there are many people who say that 2 degrees is, obviously, given what we're seeing already, is not exactly good news to begin with. But you see how, the science is changing, that we're actually seeing impacts happening sooner, and therefore a concern. And I love this. I just wanted to share this with you. Maybe some of you know this wonderful poem by Jane Hirschfeld, who said, "When his ship first came to Australia," Cook wrote, "the natives continued fishing without looking up, unable, it seems, to fear what was too large to be comprehended." And I thought this is such a perfect description of what we're facing. And in fact, this poem is called Global Warming. This is what we're facing. It's too large to be comprehended in many ways, what this all means. And it gets worse than that, so bear with me for a moment. This is from a study also done just a few years ago. Sorry for the bad quality, I need to get a better copy, but I'll give you the gist of it. Basically what this here is describing is a